So each year, while other children counted the days until Christmas, Annie instead counted the days until New Year's Eve. But year after year, she'd been disappointed. Her mother and father hadn't come for her, and now it seemed pretty certain that they weren't coming for her this year either. As the snow began to fall more heavily now, Annie sighed and rubbed her eyes to keep from crying. "They said they loved me and were coming back for me. It's in my note," whispered Annie to herself in the dark. "Where are they? Why haven't they come for me?" Annie clasped the broken silver locket that hung around her neck, always night and day, and squeezed it tightly to her breast. "Mama! Mama! Mommy!" The littlest of the orphans in the orphanage, 6-year-old Molly, had wakened from a nightmare and was crying out for her mother. But Molly's mother had died 2 years before in a car accident, and her father had been killed in the same crash. So although she was an extraordinarily beautiful child, Molly was an orphan whom nobody wanted to adopt. An orphan like all of the other girls in the orphanage, except Annie. Annie was different, because she had a mother and a father. Somewhere. "Mama! Mommy!" cried Molly again, waking up the girls in the beds around her. "Shut up," shouted Pepper from the next bed. "Yeah, can't nobody get any sleep around here," grumbled Duffy. "Mama! Mommy!" screamed Molly again. "I said, shut your little trap, Molly," said Pepper, getting angrily out of bed, picking Molly up and shoving her down on the floor. At 14, Pepper was the oldest and the biggest of the orphans, a pug-nosed rapscallion with a face full of freckles and long tousled hair that was even redder than Annie's. "Ah, stop pushing the poor little kid around," said July. "She ain't done nothing to you." 12 years old, the sweetest of the orphans, if not exactly the prettiest, July had received her name because, simply enough, she'd been abandoned as a baby at the orphanage on the 4th of July. "She's keeping me awake, ain't she?" Pepper snapped back at July. "No, you're keeping us awake," said July. "You want to make something out of it?" said Pepper, walking over to July's bed. "Oh, the Jack Dempsey of the orphanage," said July. And in a moment she and Pepper were rolling on the floor in a shrieking, punching, hair-pulling fight that woke up 8-year-old Tessie in her bed at the far end of the dormitory. Oh my goodness, they're fighting and I won't get no sleep all night," whined Tessie, a pale, frightened girl with blonde pigtails, a thin, beaked nose, and scarcely any chin at all. Oh my goodness. Annie had been silently watching from the window, and now she stepped forward and broke up the fight between Pepper and July. "Come on, you two, cut it out and go back to bed," commanded Annie, pulling the fighting girls apart. "Aw, nuts to you, Annie," muttered Pepper, and glowering as she stomped back to her bed. But Pepper didn't try to pick a fight with Annie. Although she was a good deal smaller than Pepper, Annie was recognized by all the orphans as the toughest among them. Even Pepper was afraid of her. The smartest of the orphans, too, and their acknowledged leader, especially in their never-ending battles with the headmistress of the orphanage, Miss Hannigan. "Pepper started it, Annie," said July, pushing Molly down. "I know," said Annie, patting July on the shoulder, "but you gotta go back to sleep, all of you." "Okay, Annie," said July, climbing back into her bed as Annie went to comfort Molly, who was still crouched on the floor. Kneeling beside Molly, Annie pulled the child into her arms. "It's all right, Molly. Annie's here," said Annie, gently stroking Molly's long black hair. "It was my mama, Annie," said Molly, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks. "We was riding on the ferry boat, and she was holding me up to see all the big ships, and then she was walking away waving, and I couldn't find her no more, anywhere." "It was only a dream, honey," said Annie, drying Molly's eyes with the sleeve of her nightgown. "Now you gotta go back to sleep. It's after 4 o'clock.